On this episode of the podcast, I'll be chatting to UB40 drummer Jimmy Brown. Jimmy is a founding member of the group who became reggae superstars, gigging throughout the world and recording hit after hit, and album after album. And they recently released, I think it's their 20th album, Bigga Baggariddim, and UB40, as everyone knows, have had hits both sides of the Atlantic in Britain and America. Jimmy Brown, welcome to the Celtic Soul Podcast. It's an honour to have you on the show for a chat. I've been a fan of the band since those early days, through watching you on Top of the Pops and listening to my older brother's records, which I was lucky enough to inherit, Jimmy, and I've added to over the years. So how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's the weather's not great, so I'm quite happy to be sitting indoors chatting over Zoom rather than being out in this terrible weather. But yeah, no, I'm good, just waiting to start work again.
Certainly not Jamaica.
It really isn't Jamaica, no. Although, I must admit, the inside of my house is nice and tropical, so...
magic. Jimmy, just before we start, you've obviously recorded in Jamaica. I've been there a couple of times myself, with a place called The Grill being my favourite place. What's your favourite place in Jamaica?
Well, okay, yeah. I've spent time in The Grill, but I remember I stayed once in a place called Frankfurt, which was just outside of UB40'S. A beautiful old fort that was from back in the slavery days, I suppose. And it was the beach house to the plantation, which is on the hills above the beach. And I remember Winston Churchill. He was an artist. And one of his most famous paintings is of a beach with a palm tree that's hanging over a beach. It's really one of his most famous. And it was this beach, a private beach that I was staying on there. And it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever stayed in Jamaica or anywhere. Jamaica can be rough in parts, but this was absolute paradise, and I'll never forget it.
And the people?
Well, of course, the people are just, we've always had a relationship with, the parents of our friends, you know what I mean? And they were always a lot friendlier than any of the English parents ever were, if you're going to hang around in your mate's house or whatever when you come home from school, So, yeah, we've always had a relationship with the island, and it's amazing how much above its weight it punches on music and lots of other things as well. Sport, for instance.
It's funny, my everlasting memory of Jamaica, the first time I went, was we'd flown through Miami and stayed in Miami for a couple of days where everybody was chasing the dollar. It was really fast, very money orientated, very expensive. And then we got to Jamaica, and a little old lady picked us up in a taxi to take us to the hotel. It was Montego Bay we were staying for the first couple of days, and she was taking us on. The difference in this taxi from the taxi we'd got to the airport in Miami was just night and day, and that was the whole experience I had in Jamaica. The people were just so welcoming, and so they didn't have a lot, but what they had, they were happy to share, and it was just beautiful.
Yeah. It's a constantly exploited island as well, a lot of the local traders get shut down because they built because Asians came in and built a shopping mall, and all the cruise ship people were going, they were landing in UB40'S or whatever, and just going to these shopping malls and not giving the local traders a chance and all. They've been heavily exploited over the years. And with terrible local politics and really rough infrastructure. I bet the journey from the airport to your hotel was a bit hair-raising, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough, when we got there the first time we booked into an all-inclusive for 2 days, and I think we left it after about a day because my wife said, I just can't do this. I want to see the island. So we ended up travelling around the island. We got a guide when we went to certain places because we were told that, the white face, it would be rough enough, but it was just magnificent, and the people we met along the way. And we went back a few years later just because we'd seen the island. We went back just to finish off what we didn't get to see, and we went to the other side and went to Peter Tosh's grave and stuff like that, which isn't as touristy as the Bob Marley trail, but it was wonderful, and the people were just, and I'm still in contact with some of the people, which was Amazing. But look, I'm not here to talk about my holidays, Jimmy. For first, before we start, I want to get this. I want to get this off my chest. I just want to offer my deepest condolences to you and the band members on Brian Travers, who I was supposed to interview before he passed away, and Astro, who passed away recently, and two musicians and fellow band members that would have played a massive part in your life for so long.
Yeah, well, life throws these surprises at you, doesn't it? Especially when you get older. I imagine I'm a fair bit older than you. And, although that said, the tragedy of it is that these guys were only in their early 60s, which is still fairly young, isn't it? I'm 64. And you think to yourself, well, I've still got a lot of life left in me, and it's just such a tragedy for that to be cut short, I mean, with Brian, obviously, we knew, he was battling cancer for about 3 years before he eventually succumbed to it. And so that wasn't a shock, really, but it's such a tragedy. And also, there's a massive hole to fill, because of his contribution to the band. It wasn't just playing saxophone. He was one of our most prolific lyric writers. Only a few of us would write lyrics, and he was the main one. And also his charisma on stage. He was constantly, people wanted to watch him. He was fun to watch on stage, and kept the vibe of the gigs going. And he was the main man, really, the most charismatic of all the members of the band, more charismatic than any of the singers we've ever had. Though he's a massive hole, and that hole will never be filled. I mean, obviously, we had our problems with Astro in the past, and he was working with Ali, and so that affected us a lot less. And we'd already been touring without him, so we managed to replace what we lost with Astro, but with Brian we never will. Because he was such an important member of the band, And see, Astro wasn't there from the very beginning. He's not an old mate the way Brian was. But I went to school with Brian, and so did Earl and Ali, and we were all friends from 11 years old, and that really is, it's going to affect you, isn't it? When you've known somebody all your life like that, and you've lived out of each other's pockets for a whole lifetime. It's quite a heavy thing, but it's also part of life, isn't it? These things happen.
Yeah, well, someone said to me recently, we're only on a journey on this earth, and certainly Brian's journey was a great journey.
Yeah, what they say about the light burning bright, his light burned bright, to the point where he burnt itself out, I suppose, but he certainly did make an impression while he was around, that's for sure.
Not bad for an Irishman.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was always that Irish fieriness that he had, that spurred him on and made him really a massive creative force, because he wasn't just, like I say, a lyric writer and the most charismatic member of the band, and also wrote all the brass lines. But he was also a fairly prolific artist himself, and did lots of paintings and sculptures. And towards the end, he just accelerated and did loads and loads of work before he succumbed in the end. And he was aware of his limited time and just had to get that creativity out of himself.
Wow, it's just so positive, a positive vibe from when he got ill to do all that. Jimmy, as I said earlier there, just in the intro, I'd listened to you from an early age, and I'd also listened to a lot of the two-tone bands, and the attitude, the music and the lyrics would certainly play a part in how I looked at the world as I got older, and especially in those formative teenage years. So, Jimmy, take me back to Birmingham, and what influenced you growing up, and what shaped your outlook on life?
Well, it's all about the band, obviously, and I mean, we wouldn't exist without Birmingham being what it is, a multicultural city, you know. I mean, it was a complete melting pot. And the school I went to, my kind of infants and junior school, which is what they were called in them days, that was like you had Arabs, you had from the Caribbean, people from the Caribbean, you had a lot of Irish, English working class, Asian, you know, Indian, Pakistani, and this was all a big melting pot, and we all went to school together, and there was no real dominant culture, you know, it was just so mixed. And to me, that was just about the best education you could possibly have, is being brought up in that environment, you know. I went to the same junior school as the bass player, you know. We were born in the same maternity hospital, you know. And that multicultural, multiracial environment that we were brought up in has coloured everything we've done since, you know. That was so exciting to us at that time, you know. We were friends with the first generation of non-white British. Obviously, all our mates at school, their parents would have come over from wherever, Jamaica, St. Kitts, Barbados, wherever, and they would have then had their kids, and those were the kids that were our friends at school, you know. They were the first generation of Black British, and that was a privilege, what can I say, you know. And they've been brought up in Small Heath, which is an inner city area of Birmingham. You could sit on your doorstep and watch the four corners of the world go by, you know. The first Asian grocery shop I can remember in the 60s was opposite my house, you know. And there used to be a Blues 3 doors down, and there was the Irish family on the other side where we played with all the kids. You know, this was the environment that was, and even though there was so much racism around then, we weren't racist, and that's, I think, is what developed into sort of an anti-racist youth culture. If only we had that today, you know. But in those days, youth culture was anti-racist, you know, and like the first wave of skinheads, for instance, which was in the late 60s, early 70s, loved reggae and went to all the reggae dances, and it was only the post-punk skinheads where they became kind of racist and fascist, and, you know, it was, but the real skinheads from the late 60s, they, along with the mods, you know, at that time, they embraced reggae and you know, multiculturalism without even thinking about it, you know. So to me, it was such a special time. It was almost like a golden generation.
Yeah, and I think UB40 were not just the music, but the band and how it was so multicultural. I think that was so far ahead of its time, because I look now, back then, you know, it was only white faces on television. All the presenters were white, all the celebrities were white. And when I look now, and I was watching an afternoon show yesterday on the TV in Ireland, and there was a black female presenter and a white male presenter. You know, that wouldn't have happened. Even probably before the lockdown, that wouldn't have happened, because the Black Lives Matter has certainly brought not only colour, but it's brought sexuality, and it's brought, you know, like, there's racism towards people who are white because of where they're from, be they from Ireland or another country, Welsh or whatever. And I think the band back then, especially for us growing up, because I live in a multicultural society now, but back when I was a kid, the only black and Asian people I saw were probably doctors in the hospital, and there was black nuns in the town. There wasn't a lot. So we were probably the last white post in Europe, really, because we didn't really have a lot going economically. And then we only saw racism coming in here when we had East European immigrants coming in to work, and we had African immigrants coming in, and some Asian immigrants coming in because of conflict. So we became a racist place, and I was so lucky that I had the likes of UB40 and the music they had taught me, and the lyrics that UB40 and the two-tone movement had taught me, so I could teach my son and he could teach his mates. about, this isn't on, like, and to explain what happened to the Irish when they went around the world. So, as far as I'm concerned, I thank UB40 and the two-tone bands for forming my early teenage years, because you were ahead of your time. And I think the Black and White Minstrels video really sent up what was a shocking programme. And when I was looking at an old video the other night and that came up, and I was explaining it to someone, and they were going, wow, they were so far ahead of their time.
Yeah, I think that we were the pioneering generation in that way, I think. Like I said, youth culture then was anti-racist, we're talking late 70s, early 80s, that Rock Against Racism and, those kind of organisations, and, and I think for a time it worked to some degree. I think they brought laws in the kind of 80s and 90s where you couldn't be overtly racist in public. It was frowned on. It was not only bad manners, but it became against the law, really, to be just shouting out, racist remarks to people, and you could get done for it, and that meant that. But what that didn't do was that didn't get rid of racism. All that did was it got rid of racism in public discourse. It didn't actually get rid of real racism, which gets passed on in the family. If you're born in a family where it's just normal to be racist, then you're going to think that's normal. And even though you couldn't say it in public, it still festered. And then when Brexit came along, and people like and UKIP and Nigel Farage and all them kind of idiots, they made it acceptable for racism to come back out again. And I believe that it's just as racist today, maybe even more so than it was back in our day. It's just it's more insidious. It's less obvious. But I think the cat came out of the bag with Brexit, and I think the majority of people voted Brexit because of foreigners and immigrants. And I think now, if you want to, you can make an experiment. If you want to go to the local, if you're on Facebook and go to the local page for your area, no matter where you are, in England I'm talking here, I wouldn't like to say about Ireland, but in England, go anywhere, whether it's a little village or whether it's a big city or whatever, your local Facebook page, and suggest that you support Black Lives Matter, and then see what reaction you get. Because I'll guarantee that you will get a load of people, racists, who will just rear up at you. And that's, to me, that means that there isn't a lot of progress being made, even though that we felt that we were on the front line of race relations, if you like, where, we were just mates, in the end. We were hearing our parents talking negatively about black people, for instance, but they were our mates that we were sitting next to at school. So you knew there was a disconnect, because that's your mate that they're talking about, and you could see that what they were saying didn't relate to any kind of reality. Do you know what I mean? And and we learned how racism worked pretty early on, because I could guarantee I'd walk into a shop with Earl, the bass player, whose parents come from Jamaica, and we would walk into like a sweet shop or a newsagent or whatever, and he would get treated completely differently to the way I got treated. And I could see that a million miles away, that they were, you're going to be stealing stuff, so they're constantly looking at him and ignoring me completely, and that you could just see it was so blatant. And we learned these lessons really early on, about how racism works and how it's a lot more subtle than you think it is. Just being overtly racist is one thing. And also the way racism can hide in liberalism as well. Liberals being patting you on the back and being patronising, and, that racism works at all levels of society, and it still does, really. So I don't want to be depressing or anything, but I don't think, despite the fact that we've existed and, and we've been multicultural and multiracial forever, it hasn't really made a lot of difference, I don't think.
Yeah, I look at Ireland now. As I said, we were the last white post, but we are reaping the benefits of it now because I'm a massive football fan, and it's all the Nigerians kids that come in that are now grabbing the headlines for the Irish international football team. And when I think back to Chris, Chris Houghton making his debut, the first black player to play for Ireland back in the late 70s, early 80s, I'm just not sure the date. And then one of our greatest ever players, Paul McGrath. This is, and now, it's great for the young people to aspire now to see that, it doesn't matter what colour you are, if you've got talent, you've got talent. And did you ever get caught up in, because I've read so much about, were you into football when you were younger, or was it just the music?
Well, unfortunately, I was born in the shadow of St Andrews, which is the blues ground, Birmingham City.
The Zulus.
I'm condemned. I'm condemned to be a supporter for the rest of my life, which is not something I would choose to do. My old man took me when I was... And, it was not a nice experience. The game was 0-0, and I didn't really get into football much. But then when you're born in the shadow of the football ground, then you kind of need, you still take an interest, you know what I mean? Obviously, we hate all Villa supporters, because even though Brian was a Villa supporter, see how that works. And yeah, I've given up on the blues because there's a gypsy curse on the blues, and we'll never do any good.
Yeah, and it's funny, the hooligan crew was called the Zulus. So obviously, which is...
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And
they were the first multiracial hooligans, the Zulus. That was always a multiracial organisation. Zulus, they all come from where I was born, Small East. That's Zulu territory. And we knew them really well, and they were a hard bunch of guys, and they're, quite scary. But multiracial, which was obviously significant for Birmingham. That's Birmingham all over. But Birmingham's one of the few cities that doesn't come out of a medieval port. It actually is not very old. It's only a couple of 100 years old, and it's in the middle of the country. So in ports you have this to and froing to the rest of the world. And people who live in ports who maybe have migrated in will still have connections to home, and whereas with Birmingham, it's kind of, you're all put in the middle of England and told to get on with it, and we've all had to share a culture together and grow up in the same culture together, whether we were black or white or Arab in Norman's case, that was, we all shared the same culture, and we all shared the same music, which was reggae, and that would bind us together all our lives,
Yeah, and you've certainly left a mark on the city, famous sons of the city, because we stayed there when Ireland played Wales a couple of years ago. We made Birmingham a base because it was cheaper to fly in and it was cheaper to stay there. So we went for a couple of days, and we were in a club on the Sunday night, small enough kind of 80s kind of club, and just having a good night. And the very last song was UB40, and the place went absolutely mental. So we knew we were in UB40 country.
Yeah, Birmingham City, if they ever score, which is rare, but if they do, then they all chant the beginning to Food for Thought. The saxophone riff at the start of Food for Thought. They all start chanting it and clapping, and you can't buy that sort of cultural relevance. Yeah. That has to grow naturally out of something, So I'm just made up when I hear something like that.
Yeah, it's brilliant. What a tune as well. Look, while we're on Food for Thought, can you take us back to pre-UB40 and how the band started and the influences, and because I just remember seeing it in early, it might have been a documentary, and Brian had this big red afro, you know, and he wasn't the cool dude. He wasn't the cool dude with his anorak and his afro. That UB40 became the kings of cool, like.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny how things happen. You know, we're just a bunch of kids, you know. I mean, I remember thinking, I'm never going to get a girlfriend and it's the end of the world, you know, the way teenagers do, you know. And I remember all that. And then all of a sudden, you know, we were putting a band together and we were starting to realise actually we were cool. You know, we were just a bunch of teenagers with a dead end, really, you know what I mean? It was like Brian was working he did an apprentice electrician course, so he was working on the building sites, you know, and so was Earl, the bass player. I was working in some office somewhere because I could talk posh, and you know, Robin was apprentice toolmaker, you know, so we were all kind of had a life, but it was a dead end, really. You know, I mean, the prospects of working in a factory all your life is not really, you know. I mean, I remember, because I worked in the Jaguar in Castle Bromwich in Birmingham for a couple of years. And I remember I was in the offices and I was walking on the shop floor, massive place, thousands of workers, you know. They had a press shop. They were putting all these Jaguar cars together. And I was walking across the floor and the shop floor, and an old guy beckoned me over, and he's gone, come over. And I'm thinking, oh, what's this old bloke want? You know, I mean, he's going to bore me freaking stupid. And the old guy came over to me and he said, get as far away from this place as you possibly can, and don't look back. And that was the best advice I've ever been given. I never knew the guy and I never met him again afterwards. But he said, please leave this place as soon as you possibly can. You know. But of course, he was dead right, you know. And we were all at that point, you know, and we thought, well, let's get the band together, because it was a couple of years after we'd left school. We'd gone in our various ways and then found ourselves sort of coming back together as a gang. And we've gone, let's do it. Oh, and the catalyst for it, when we go to see Bob Marley in 1976 at the local Odeon, that was, after that gig, we've got to make a band, we've got to get a band together, you know, because it was so powerful and so moving and so exciting to see this guy at his peak, really, before he became even more popular. So he was working hard to make his name, you know. And it was a local Odeon, held a couple of thousand people, and it was packed. Third World was supporting, and it was just one of the most amazing gigs we've ever been to. And at that point, we've gone, listen, we've got to get a band together. And none of us could play, of course. You know, we hadn't even decided which instrument we were going to strap on. So, you know, it was a bit of like, let's do it. And then within a year, we'd written Food for Thought, and we were being invited on a tour by Chrissy Hind, who at the time had a number one with Brass in Pocket, number one album and number one single with Brass in Pocket. And, you know, we never looked back from there, really. And by the end of the tour that we've been invited to by the Pretenders, we had the hit with Food for Thought. Food for Thought came out right at the end of that sort of support tour that we did with the Pretenders, and it was a hit record, and that was it.
Oh, brilliant, Jimmy. Jimmy, are you moving around on a seat or something though?
Am I making a noise here?
Yeah, I can hear. You're getting animated and you're talking, and you're obviously rubbing something, and it's coming through.
I'll try and keep still. I think
it's just for the listeners, you know, because
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
those who'll be listening on the audio, you know, they'll be going, "What's going on?" But luckily enough, Roland's a quite decent producer, so he normally can get all the sounds out.
Yeah, put it through a heavy gate.
Jimmy, that time as well, right? Politics. You know, was politics shaping you, and was it shaping your music?
Yeah, it already had done. I mean, I discovered politics when I was at school, a sort of trendy kind of left-wing teacher gave me a copy of the Communist Manifesto when I was 15. And so I sat at the back of the bus reading this, didn't really fully understand it. It was a bit boring. But it did trigger a sort of lifelong sort of relationship with politics. And yeah, I mean, I know we are a political statement just by our racial mix. We don't really have to say anything else politically, but we're all, Robin's and Ali's dad was a member of the Communist Party at one time, so we're all lefties and influenced by left-wing politics and have been, and I have to say that, we were anti-Thatcher and of course we'd be, we're anti-Tory. And I believe the state that we're in now vindicates what we were saying, with the amount of poverty around, the inequality, the fact that people can't buy a house, and are paying exorbitant rents, and, the inflation and the buying power of the working class has been suppressed and has gone down and down, while the growth of the billionaire class has gone out of proportion. All these things, were from the Thatcher years and from the Big Bang deregulation of the early 80s, 1984, when they deregulated all the banks and, when Thatcher said, let the managers manage, and took away all the union power and left it up to the executives to have all the power, and, all that's culminated in the kind of poverty we see, and food banks and, suicides, and people can't get a dentist, and, all these things that make life hard have their roots. And we've been vindicated, I think, that if, that we should have changed direction when Blair got in power, but we didn't. He became part of the post-Thatcher neoliberal consensus that, that meant the banks, financialised every aspect of our lives, and this is where we are now, isn't it?
And did you have any hope with Corbyn when Corbyn was head of Labour?
Yeah, of course I did. It was like, hang on a minute, this miracle has happened where a decent human being, a decent politician, very hard to find, has almost got his hands on the levers of power. And it was an exciting time. We campaigned quite heavily for Jeremy, and I consider him to be a friend and a decent man. And I think that's probably the closest we'll ever get to a decent society. And now we're further away than ever, and it's a depressing thought. But, maybe it will come round again, but I don't think it will in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Just nearly.
When we look in from the outside here, obviously we are bombarded with British media, and there was certainly a media campaign at all levels, from newspapers, broadcast media, against Jeremy Corbyn, who I've always thought was a decent man, who was attacked for stuff that was untrue, but he was also attacked from within his own party.
And I think that now the Labour Party, well, it's not a Labour Party, is it? It's a Tory light party. It's the acceptable face of it's the true Conservatives, really, because I don't call Boris Johnson and all his crew, I don't call them Conservatives. And I didn't call Thatcher a Conservative either, because they don't conserve anything. They have a scorched earth policy which completely changes the whole, Thatcher deregulated and made everything different. There was no conservation involved. And Johnson, he doesn't conserve anything. He'll throw anything out the window if he needs to. The new Conservatives now are people like Starmer, who is promoting himself as a safe pair of hands. And all that's saying to me is, I can keep the status quo. That's all he's saying. I can make things more secure and better the way they are, not but within a society that they're voting for Brexit, so they want change. People want change, and we're in a position now where it's Boris Johnson that's offering change, and Keir Starmer is offering security, and conservatism and an efficient way of neoliberalism to work, which is not what we want, I mean, it was the same with Trump and Hillary Clinton, where Clinton was offering more of the same and Trump was offering to change things. And you can see how that can be attractive to people, that people are hungry for change because we've had so many decades of exploitation. And like I said, the bankers financialising every aspect of our lives, And also we had the banking crash, which they still haven't recovered. Most global financial institutions are still insolvent. So, all they've done is patch up things and kick the can down the road by rationalising debt, which is what caused the crash in 2007, 2008. And all they did was made more debt so that we could carry on, but nothing fundamental has changed about the banking system. And now we've got tuition fees and car loans. People don't buy cars anymore. They get a loan for a car, and all these things, that most of these won't get paid back. Student loans won't get paid back, not at the level that they think they will. And that's going to cause, and that's bigger than the subprime mortgages that caused the crash in 2007, 2008, So we're on the verge, I believe, of another crash. And, there's nobody even looking at it, it seems to me, apart from people like, say, Piketty, for instance, who's a very interesting, the French economist talking about getting rid of the billionaire class, which is what we definitely have to do. We've got to eat the rich.
Yeah, well, in Ireland, we had the financial crash, which then in turn the taxpayers had to bail out the banks. The working class people had to bail out the banks, and those same banks are now coming after the working class people's houses, which they can't afford because they bought them at exorbitant prices. And so it's a vicious cycle. But I think there is some change coming in Ireland. I firmly believe that there will be a political change in Ireland for the first time ever, because we've always had one or the other, Tweedledum or Tweedledee, which are now in power together. So I'm, for my son's generation, I'm positive, because things can only get better, as we once heard someone say in England, and they didn't. But I think things can get better here, and they didn't. But like, I look at like UB40'S success, and when I had Paul Heaton and Peter Hooton on the podcast, I asked them both a question, and I'm going to ask you, Jimmy. Go on. Did fame change you?
Well, I mean, yeah, obviously it's got to, innit? For a start, I'm conceited enough to think you might find my opinions interesting, and if I was just some kid working in an office somewhere, excuse me, I probably wouldn't be thinking that, so I think it's worth, I think I'm important enough to be bothered to come onto the podcast and give you my opinion, so obviously that feeds, that's fed into by, the fame and the whatever and the success. But I'm a lucky man, I'm still with the same woman that I was with before the band even started, that we met in, when we were teenagers, and I've got a fantastic family, 4 beautiful daughters, and they've all got partners and grandkids and whatever. So, to that degree, I haven't changed, my direction was set before the band even started, as far as family is concerned, So, and they kept my feet on the ground, But that doesn't necessarily count for all of us, you know what I mean? There are, one of the problems and one of the reasons we ended up with Ali leaving was because he changed, and and didn't have those family connections and didn't have those things to keep his feet on the ground, and so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the fact that even if the band just ceased to exist tomorrow, I feel I had a successful life because I've got a functioning family, which is not easy to. I mean, I probably would never have been able to do it if I was still working in an office somewhere and hadn't been in a band that made loads and, I could afford to do it. But in the end, that's what's going to keep my feet on the ground, I think. And it's worth more to me than even being in a band, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and Jimmy, another question I asked both of the boys, because it's something I don't ask football players when I interview them for some reason. It's just because most of the, I suppose, people who've made it in the music industry that I've interviewed, they've come from humble backgrounds, they've come from working class backgrounds. And when I asked them about the fame question, I also asked them about the money question. Did money change you, Jimmy?
Not really, no. I was just really good at spending it. What can I say? We had a party, me and the missus, we partied and partied and partied until pretty much everything was spent, really, Obviously, we don't earn as much as we used to, so we don't have that lavish lifestyle that we did have at one point. I've still got a house with a swimming pool, let's put it that way. But, we would just, at the drop of a hat, go to Barley if we felt like it, or go, we just had the freedom to do whatever we wanted to do. And, so, I mean, I'm crap with money. What can I say? My dad used to bring his wage packet home, worked in a factory all his life, and used to give it to my mum, and she used to sort out the finances for the family. And pretty much I've kept that tradition going. I just, let the missus deal with the important stuff, and she'll give me my allowance. So,
But it's been documented.
I don't think
Sorry, Jimmy, it's been documented that bankruptcy hit members of the band or the band. So how does that affect you?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was times when I had to borrow money to pay the bills, and that was, I mean, let's face it, even Michael Jackson died with, 400 million in debt. The rock star lifestyle needs a constant input of finances, and doesn't always get it. I mean, records don't sell like they used to. So you have to tighten your belt accordingly, I don't feel like it's always good to be reminded what it's like to not have a lot of money. And we were reminded all of a sudden, we went from being comfortable to having nothing overnight, and then we slowly clawed our way back. And I think it is good to be reminded, what it's like to live on meagre income, and that hasn't, it showed me that I had some really good friends and some great family who helped me out at times when I needed to, and that all stabilised in the end. But you do remember it, it does scar you, I suppose, to a degree, when you're worried about putting food on the table. But also it keeps your feet on the ground as well, doesn't it? And you're only living the same as millions of others,
It's great to hear you saying that you've good family and friends around you, because when you are in a superstar band, I'm sure there was plenty of Klingons over the years.
Yeah, well, I'm one of them people that I don't have a lot of friends, but the ones I do have are lifelong mates, proper mates. My kids call them uncle and aunt, and, they're like members of the family, even though we're not blood related, So I think that I put a lot of store in that, I think those friendships have lasted the test of time, and I don't need many, and I'm not looking for any new friends, and, I'm not out there, socialising or going to parties, or, I'm quite happy with things the way they are, And it's important, you know. But I think you have to nurture these things. They can easily go wrong, you know. You have to put an effort into friendships and an honesty as well, and a trust. And those are hard to come by.
Yeah, I travelled to see the football with some great friends, and you know, I know they've got my back and I've got theirs, and it's very important. And I know there's a lot of people that, you know, I've often said, you know, I've many acquaintances but few real good friends, and I think that's true for most people. You know,
and I think that's definitely, you know, we know. It's the same for my mum and dad. You know, they had great friends, and but not many. You know, and they would be regular, and that there were people that you could. But it's also an unwritten thing, isn't it, that you have a great mates, but you make a sort of unconscious promise never to sort of overburden them. You know, and be a taker in a relationship. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, you have a mate that you know would do anything for you, but he can trust that you're not going to ask him to do everything for you. Do you know what I mean? You know, that it works both ways, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, look, you know yourself, when things are good, everyone wants to be your friend, and when things are shit, there's not many that you can turn to, but you can turn to good friends. Now, Jimmy, as a teenager, I said earlier on there, you know, two-tone and ska, you know, it was like, when it kind of filtered out, when the two-tone thing filtered out, Jimmy, I started to listen, I started to go back, you know, and try and find out more about this music. Obviously, Bob Marley was the first stop, but after hearing the first Labour of Love album back in 83, I searched out those original artists that you had covered, second-hand record shops and borrowing records, and, you know, going to jumble sales, and you were surprised what you could pick up. But one of the singers that I started listening to back then was Ken Booth, and I finally got to see him about 10 years ago in London. I flew over with one of my best pals, Baz, with no tickets. We bummed our way in, we got to the door, and luckily enough we knew the promoter. He didn't know us, but we knew him, and we got him to the door and we told him our story, and he let us in. And it was down in Camden, and it was one of the most amazing gigs I was ever at with this man. But you've recorded with him, and tell me a bit about Ken Booth and the other legends that you've recorded with.
Yeah, well, you know, that's another thing, you know. I mean, I remember me talking about the Bob Marley gig that we all went to. That was in 1976, you know, and that was, at that time, we were big Reggae fans, and obviously Ken Booth was the crossover artist, because he'd had quite big hits in England with Everything I Own and someone else that I can't remember at the moment. Crying Over You, that was the other one.
What a tune.
Was the two big, well, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So we had, you know, Ken Booth was a crossover artist. He'd already made his name in the pop charts long time before Steel Pulse did later on, having the first reggae album in the charts. We had Earth Revolution, which was like 1978 or whatever. But we're talking early 70s here, and mid-70s, because we saw Bob Marley in 1976. And we were already fans. These were our heroes, people like Gregory Isaacs, Dennis Brown, Freddie McGregor, John Holt was the king, you know. And these people were gods to us, you know. We looked up to them the way I suppose some people look up to us now, you know. But they were gods to us, and the idea that, you know, we were a bunch of kids from inner city Birmingham who had a dream to be in a reggae band, and then became the biggest reggae band in the world, and then had an opportunity to record with all their heroes. And, you know, I mean, if it was a book, you wouldn't believe it, you know. It would be too fantastic a story for you to believe. But we do, you know, for us, we just think we're the luckiest people that ever walked the planet, that we've had all this happen to us, you know, that we actually were in the same recording studio as Gregory Isaacs and John Holt and these legends, and they were talking to us like we were friends, you know. It was Sly and Robbie. You know, we know Sly and Robbie really well now. Well, they were absolute heroes to us, and now they're mates. You know, so I mean, what an incredible journey that is. You know, I always pinch myself every single day that we've been so lucky. We still are, really. We're still working with great artists, you know. And we were just working with Inner Circle on Bigga Baggariddim.
Magic.
You know, and brilliant, absolutely brilliant. These people are like legends. You know, we were just on a Zoom with Shakademus and Pliers a couple of weeks ago, talking like old mates, you know. And then before that, we had Freddie McGregor on a Zoom broadcast. Who, you know, it was a loving, you know, for a couple of hours. You know what I mean? We're the luckiest people who ever walked the planet. And I always remind myself of that. And it's just like a dream come true, literally a dream come true.
I got goosebumps there when you were mentioning some of the artists, and I'm hearing the songs in the back because, like, it's, you know, they're so far away on the stage, and as UB40 were, and especially when you had the height of your fame. I remember going to see outdoor concerts, and you know, you'd be at the back of a football stadium, and Jimmy's a dot on the stage, and now I'm getting to speak to him. But he's also telling me about his musical heroes, which is amazing. But like that career took years, like so many albums, but it took years all over the world. And when I'm looking here at some of my notes, you know, like early pub gigs grew into playing behind the Iron Curtain. You know, from reading the Communist Manifesto on the back of the bus, the Nelson Mandela birthday concerts, you know. Like, there's so many, I've so many memories. I remember when Band Aid came out on that, and yourselves and the ska and the reggae bands brought out Starvation. You know, what a song. And that song sums up, you know, the multicultural Birmingham, really, doesn't it? Even though it was wrote by Jamaicans, because, you know, what are you, black, white, red, or an Indian? You know, this just sums it up. And Just give me some highlights of, you know, those early gigs and the big gigs, and just keep me entertained here and keep the listeners entertained.
Well, you know, I mean, you know, we've had a few. We've covered about such a long career that's gone kind of like this, that we've got quite a few highlights, you know. We touring in America, where we were playing Madison Square Garden, sold out while we had a #1 single and #1 album in America. That is, you know, that was, I mean, I remember Madison Square Garden from all the boxing matches back in the 60s, black and white, fuzzy, but it was a legendary venue.
Still is.
And it still is, absolutely. It's a legendary venue. And to fill that, you know, and have a #1 album, one #1 single in America, you're there, aren't you? You made it, you know. So that was a highlight. I mean, it was a highlight when we had our first hit with True to Thor, you know. When it turned out we were top 5, obviously our lives changed at that moment, you know, and that was a highlight as well. But then later on, we got things like doing the biggest outdoor shows ever in South Africa just after they dropped the cultural boycott. We were one of the first bands to go over and, you know, play to South Africans. 100,000 people we played to over 2 nights. They'd adopted Sing Our Own Song as like the...
I was just thinking about that in my head.
You know, that was... Can you imagine? We've got 50,000 South Africans singing Sing Our Own Song back at us. You know, I mean... You can't buy that, you know. That was just an incredible experience, you know. And I think we still hold the record for the biggest live gig ever staged in South Africa. I think U2 may have beaten us, but maybe not. But, you know, and also we did we did a tour of the Polynesia, which was absolutely incredible, playing islands like Tahiti, Fiji, New Caledonia, and, you know, doing all those islands. And it was paradise, you know. We were touring in paradise, and thousands of people were turning up because they all knew our music, because all the islands adopted reggae very early on as their music. And we were just massive amongst Polynesians, and obviously with the Maoris in New Zealand, and, you know, and just to be able to do that, go as far as you can, without coming back on yourself, and playing gigs in front of 20,000 people. It's Samoa. We did their 50 years of independence, Samoa, and you got 20,000 people all singing your songs, and that just, it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal to be part of that. And we're just the luckiest bastards who ever lived, really.
Like when you spoke of South Africa there and the gig, I remember buying the 7-inch single. I still have it, and I got goosebumps there because as a teenager growing up, I remember reading stuff about Mandela and that, because when you go to concerts back in the 80s, there was always people giving out pamphlets outside and about politics and that. And when Jerry Dammers wrote Free Nelson Mandela, that put him in, because we never heard of him before. We were kids, and then for this great man to become president of his country, and to for the likes of yourselves, a band that had supported the South African people when they were being oppressed, that must have been some buzz. Like, I can imagine the sound check, Jimmy, that day, when you're looking out at this empty place and then it's going to be full. Like, it must have been. It just must have been amazing, was it?
We cracked ourselves, that's for sure. Do you know what I mean? When you think about, when all them faces looking at you, sometimes, yeah. I mean, in the early days, because we took off pretty quick, We did about 30 pub gigs, and then we did the Pretenders tour, which went up, that was like colleges and theatres, and so that was like a couple of thousand, so that was big for us, and we never kind of looked back after that. We immediately after we finished the Pretenders tour, we booked our own tour in exactly the same venues because we had a hit record, and went back and did them ourselves, and we've done some, and then we were doing something like, in 1981, we were doing a thing called Pink Pop, which was in Holland, which was like 120,000 people were looking at us, and these things are quite scary for anyone, but we were novices, we weren't very good at playing at the time, we hadn't done our apprenticeship really, and we're thrust in front of these big audiences. That was quite hard to deal with, and probably that's where some bands get their drinking habits from, just a bit of Dutch courage before they go on stage, because then they get carried away. But, by the time we got to South Africa and we were doing that massive show, we were ready for it, I think. And we really fully appreciated that, you felt you were rubbing shoulders with history at that moment. You felt you were part of some kind of progress, which was, I don't overemphasize. I don't believe we've made, we've had any influence or changed the world in any way, and I don't think, music will not make anybody's life politically better. It might make you better just listening to it, but politically it's not going to really achieve much except just moaning, really, and we're good at moaning, but I think people appreciate that, it's nice.
I've certainly been influenced. My political thinking, Jimmy, has certainly been influenced by music. Certainly, especially the teenage years.
Yeah, but that's only preaching to the converted, really.
Well, I wasn't back then.
Well, okay. Well,
I was open.
Exception to the rule. Well, yeah, you're not an out kind of, you weren't like a racist kind of reactionary, National Front. We had the National Front back in them days, which was like...
We were lucky we didn't have that.
No, you didn't need them, no, did you?
No.
I mean, in the end, you didn't have... there wasn't a lot of immigration in the end. It was only, like you said, it was only later with, from Nigerians and, that Ireland really experienced that.
Did you find out...
Apart from English, of course.
Jimmy, did you find I've always found the snobbery in music with certain bands and people who follow certain bands. Now I don't know if you ever felt as being a superstar in a reggae band, but UB40 was sprayed on the walls in the council estate I grew up in. You know, many, many miles away from Birmingham, as was Madness and the Specials and the UK subs and the punk bands and that. And I have great memories of seeing, because you would see something sprayed on the wall and ask, well, who are they? So you would go home and delve through your brother's records to find them. But I always found with UB40 that, you know, we were kind of looked down on by some people because we were UB40 fans. And there's a band in Dublin from Finglas called Aslan. Now, they didn't make it to the heights of UB40, but Brian is from Finglas, and they're a wonderful band and wonderful lyrics and working class. But I always found with them as well that their fans will look down. People look down their nose at them. Oh, I wouldn't go and see Aslan because, you know, it'll be a rough crowd there, you know. And like, you go, well, you're not really going to see who's in the crowd. You're going to see the band, you know. And I always found that. Did you ever find that, being from working class roots within the music industry at a higher level, that there was snobbery?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we are a blue-collar band, without a doubt. You know, that our main audience is a blue-collar audience. You know, we're not kind of arty kind of, you know, we don't do indie, we don't do that kind of thing. We're just a basic, entertaining, blue-collar band, you know, and we've always been aware of that, you know. We're not afraid of doing commercial music, you know. We don't talk ourselves out of it, you know. We're not a bedsit band, you know, where you could sit and listen to us and slash your wrists, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like I don't know, you know, that sort of Leonard Cohen kind of depressing, Joan Armatrading kind of, you know. We weren't like that. We were an entertaining band. We were a band that comes from a culture where you get dressed up on a Friday and Saturday night and go out, you know, and go out and listen to dance music or whatever, and try and find a girl or whatever, you know. And that's the tradition we're part of. And I suppose we were definitely looked down on by the more middle class, sort of pseudo-intellectual, sort of rock think aspects of the music media, you know, the ones that are into indie stuff and arty stuff, and that's not our thing and never will be our thing. So yeah, there is stuff, but you know, it doesn't bother us, you know. In the end, we've had such success, we're not going to worry about a few detractors, you know what I mean, that are no significance to us.
Yeah, and it's funny, like how the music press judge some people. Paolo Nutini, who's a big star now, and I've seen Paolo in open air places and smaller venues when you're starting up. I found Paolo Nutini by mistake. I bought Select magazine. They were giving away a free CD, and the Jam was on the CD, so I said, oh, that's a couple of bands I know on that. Picked it up in the newsagents coming back from work, stuck it on in the car, got home and said to my wife, there's this Italian guy on this CD. I says, you got to hear him, he's brilliant. So I took the CD into the house and I played this Paolo Nutini song. Now, I didn't know Paolo was a Celtic fan from Paisley in Scotland. I just thought the name, he was Italian. Yeah. I was never heard him before. And it was off his first album. So I checked out his first album, slated by the press, slated by the music press. Checked out his second album, which was brilliant, I thought, slated by the press, you know. Then all of a sudden, Paolo was playing stadiums. He's big time. He brings out his third album, and all of a sudden, he's brilliant. And you know, he's the same journalists that have been slating him. You know, they now think he's great because he's made the big time, and that just kind of that pissed me off. And I was delighted I was there for this Italian bloke from Paisley. His mum and dad own a fish and chip shop, close to where St Mirren play. So you know, a place to pop in for lunch and pound and things should be. But because he didn't fit the mould of the rock star, and you know, they slated him until he was filling out stadiums.
Yeah, no, I think the quality of journalism is dire anyway. I mean, across the board, with any kind of journalism, it's not like it used to be, you know. People do most of their journalism online now, don't they? They just Google it and then make a story out of it, you know. And I've never really had much respect for the music press and, you know, don't really take any notice of them, you know. I mean, me personally, I know some people, Brian used to get upset when we got bad reviews, but it never used to bother me because in the end, I know when we've done a good gig And if I get a bad review for what I know to be a good gig, then I ignore the bad review, because that's just down to them. I was there at the gig. I know how well we went down, and I know what the audience were like. So if somebody says it was a bad show, that's their problem, not my problem, So I've never really took any notice of what the press say, and I've never have done and never will do, because in the end, it's about bums on seats, isn't it? I mean, I don't take it for granted. I still feel, sometimes the audience are cheering, and I'm still looking behind me to see who's walked on, and you realise, God, this is for us, you know what I mean? This is and this was something that happened very early on in our careers, where the audience would be going wild, and we'd be thinking, who's just walked on, this, and it takes a while for you to accept that, you know what I mean? It takes a while for you to realise, yeah, it is for you, and you might as well enjoy it instead of looking for a reason why it shouldn't, So I learned to do that a long time ago, and that's the most important thing in the end, is how well the audience respond to what you're doing. And we've always had great gigs. Our gigs are a party. If you haven't got a sore throat from singing and a sore feet from dancing, then we haven't done our job, And it's not about talking about politics or trying to raise anybody's consciousness. It's literally about having a good time and going home feeling satisfied, going home feeling better than you did when you came, and that's our job, is to uplift people. And while we still do that, then that's all I'm bothered about,
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to see the band on a number of times, and that's the way I've always left. I've always left sweating. I was a lot thinner then, I suppose, back in some of the early gigs. But my favourites that stick out. I remember the second Labour of Love album coming out, and I said, this is going to open up, people's minds to, these Jamaican singers now, because UB40 have done another Labour of Love album. And I remember seeing, I think it was the Point Out, he just played in Dublin. And that was one of the, to hear that album, to hear, reggae fans performing these songs, this was working class theatre to me. This was amazing. And it's funny, you also mentioned Shaka Demus there, and I remember them supporting you, on one of the tours. So I have so many members of UB40, and I can't have you on without mentioning my nephew, who's a big man now, but he used to come up to my mum's house with a monkey, a cuddly monkey, and a UB40 video, and he used to call you UR40, and my mother used to put him in front of the telly, and he would watch the gig from start to finish, and this was every day. He didn't want cartoons, he didn't want, and I don't think he still has monkey, but I think he might still have the video. So Robbie, if you're listening, and I know you will be, I had to get you in, and you're probably pissed off being asked this, because it's been well publicised, the departure of Ali first and then Astra and Mickey from the band. Now, if you don't want to speak about it, that's fine, but from our point of view as fans, this is upsetting for us, as it is for the band, because we've been on this journey with you, and we're not like the media or the people who want to write bad things. I've seen Ali after the band. I seen him at a small gig in Spain when he was doing his solo stuff, an open air gig, and a wonderful gig as well. But it does hurt us, and I'm sure it has split fans, because it's like when there's a divorce. Some people side with the wife, and some people side with the husband, and I think there's a bit of that with this, is there? But you probably don't want to talk about it.
No, I don't mind talking about it. I mean, to a degree, you're right, but not that much, really. In the end, it didn't. I mean, some fans did go over to follow Ali, but really, actually, the majority stayed with us. That we were. It really hasn't. I mean, we're talking. How many years? It was 2008. This happened, so we're talking 12 years ago. And it really didn't make that much difference. That we were still doing British sellout British tours. I mean, obviously, we're not as big now as we were in our peak, but then records don't sell in the same way that they used to. It's a different business now, but we're still going strong. In 2019, we did 120 shows. That's a lot of gigs to do in 1 year, and it didn't really make that much difference. And I feel that the majority of the fans stayed with the band, and because there's an ethos with the band, we were always a bunch of mates that got together and made music together and had the chemistry to create something that didn't sound like anybody else, so that's still there. I mean, there are 6 original members to UB40 who go back to when we were 11 years old together. We went to school together, and obviously we knew Robin because he was Ali's brother, and we used to go to Ali's house when we were 11, 12 years old and hang out there. And we used to go to Norman's house because he lived opposite the school, and we'd go over and smoke in his house in the lunch times. And, so this is all, there are 6 of us that knew each other from that very early age. And of those 6, when Ali left, there was still 5 of us together as UB40. So, and like I said, Brian's the lyric writer, and I always does the B lines, I always do the drums. We were a proper band, and that band was still there, even though we lost our lead singer. A bit like a football team, you lose your striker, but, and the fans aren't happy about it because he's a great striker. But then you get another striker in, and when they start scoring a few goals, then the fans will warm to the new striker, and that's what happened when we got Dunk involved, because he was still part of the gang, he was in my class at school. So we weren't going a million miles away from where we originally were, So it didn't really affect us that much, to be honest, when Ali left. The only problem we had, I mean, we wished him luck, it was up to him. I mean, obviously we weren't happy about it, but he's entitled to leave and go solo if he wants to, and that's what he did, Our only problem is when he started using the name UB40 again, because he'd left the band, and we're not happy with him advertising his gigs as UB40, because it's not. He left UB40 a long time ago, and there's no musicians on stage that were anything to do with UB40, so we believe that that's a lie, and we've been pursuing him in the courts ever since, but it's an expensive and long-winded game to do that. But, we wish him well with his own career, but he shouldn't be using the name of the band that he left in 2008. And he didn't use the name of the band to start off with, he used his own name, but because he couldn't sell gigs under his own name, he started using UB40's name, because that's the name that sells tickets in the end, And that's our beef with him. I mean, he slags us off, in the media, and plays the media game a bit, when you air your dirty linen in public. They love that in the media, and we've tried our hardest not to respond to that, because you're just keeping it alive, Just let it be yesterday's chip paper and let people forget it, and don't get into this sort of slanging match in the media, which they love, and will only do us harm, And so, in the end, we wanted to stop using the name, and we're pursuing him in the courts to do that. But apart from that, we wish him luck, with his career. And but don't call yourself UB40, because you're not, And that's our stance. That's where we stand with the whole thing.
Well, thanks for letting me get an insight into that, just for our listeners. Now, during the lockdown, Mickey, has been absolutely fantastic to the fans with the Sunday night Zoom-ins. Something that I think it meant a lot to a lot of the fans, and there was a lot of people going through, mental torture, being, not being able to go for a pint or not being able to go to football and that. And this was something to look forward to for fans. So fair play to you for doing that.
Yeah, we love it. I mean, at first it was a bit weird. I mean, it goes on for 2 hours, and you think to yourself, "How are you going to fill 2 hours?" But
easy.
We got into this thing where we got guests coming on, and that was just absolutely fantastic. You know, we had Winston Francis was one of the first guests, the original Mr. Fix-It, telling us tales of when he was recording and had Bob Marley and the rest of the Wailers doing backing vocals on his records, and just all the stories of all the different great artists, John Holtz and, you know, Gregory Isaacs and people like that. You know, he had stories for all of them. And that became like a regular thing every week then. We started to enjoy it, you know, and think, wow, this is fun. We're meeting our heroes, you know, and fans are loving it, you know. We're getting tens of thousands, 50, 100,000 people watching, you know. And, and we just went on from there. And we had Black Hero, a young guy from Jamaica who's on Bigga Baggariddim, who else we've had on? Like I said, Shakademus and Flyers, Freddie McGregor we've had on. We had Inner Circle on. You know, there are that many we've had on over the year, because we did it I think we're on something like, I don't know, 60 broadcasts that we've done, which obviously it's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's every week for over a year, you know.
It's brilliant.
And we thoroughly enjoyed it, and we're still doing them, but we're not doing them quite as regularly as we were now that, you know, lockdown isn't with us anymore.
Now the pub's open.
So, who knows? It could return, couldn't it?
Don't say that.
No, do we?
Don't say that.
Yeah, but you don't know, do you? You know,
Jimmy,
it could happen.
Jimmy, please don't say that. I'm in good form now after chatting to you. Jimmy, it's been an absolute pleasure. I just want to say that I bought the new album, and the best of luck with it. I'm still a believer in vinyl and CDs, because I know the bands get screwed on Spotify and that, because they get very little for putting out their stuff. They don't get paid too well, and I know now how the music industry works. It's all about gigs now, so I can't wait to get back to see UB40 in the flesh.
Yeah, we can't wait to get up there on stage and do what we do. You know, we've been doing it 40 years, and it's real loss not being able to get up there and do it. You know, so soon as possible, really. Early part of next year.
I can't wait, Jimmy. You haven't aged a bit. You still look very young. You must be taking the Cliff Richard pseudo cream and rubbing it on the face or something, are you?
I'm not sure I want any cream to Cliff Richard. No, I'm not going to make that joke.
You know that does.
You know, it keeps you young.
God bless you, my man. Listen, thanks very much, and best wishes to the band and your family and your close friends, and thank you so much. This means so much to get you on the podcast, because we don't have the big budgets like the others, so we'll buy a drink when we see it as a thank you.
Brilliant. I'm going to hold you to that. Yeah, I want a Guinness in Dublin.
Oh, you're more than welcome to one or two. Thank you so much.
That's brilliant. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, man. What can I say? I really enjoyed it. Thanks.